Welcome, Andrea. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having
Good,
me.
good. Welcome to Hopeful Tribe. We're really excited to have you from Berkeley Copwatch because we've been doing this series on people-led solutions to homelessness, and I think that this is a really important piece of the solution,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
So, how long have you been working with Berkeley Copwatch?
Well, I'm one of the founders of Copwatch. We started Copwatch in 1990 in Berkeley in response to the stories we were hearing from unhoused people at the time about the way they were being treated by police. I was very young at the time, and it was new to me. It was new to me. Property confiscations and harassment, and the systematic effort to dislodge and remove the poor people and the appearance of poverty from the South Side area near campus. And it was a real concerted effort by the city to, by any means necessary, discourage people from being in that area. And so that opened my eyes to what was happening. And the logical response from my point of view was to document what was happening so that we could advocate for a change or to defend folks who were being subjected to this kind of treatment.
Mm-hmm. So when you say document, were you writing articles? Were you recording video? What were you doing?
Well, we're talking 30 years ago, so this is pre-internet, pre-digital. So we were analog, we were VHS. Honestly, Sue, we didn't even have VHS cameras. We were poor. So, but what we were doing is back then it was the value of us bearing witness.
Mm-hmm.
It was the idea that we were telling our volunteers to stop, watch, write down the badge number, write down what you're seeing. Just what do you observe? Just write it down.
Mm-hmm.
And back then we would take still photos as if those would make a difference now in court. But back then that would confirm location and who was involved. So that was our idea of documenting at the time. And I will tell you that our emphasis was more on discouraging police from engaging in the conduct. Now our emphasis is more on documenting what's happening so that we can fight it later. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Back then we were trying to prevent, that was more the emphasis. So with the onset of the digital age and how, it doesn't matter what you witness if you don't have a video these days, to verify your, but back then I think individuals had a little more credibility as witnesses.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a change I think that's happened over the years. So we would walk the streets, and we didn't have police scanners back then. So we would walk the streets, but Telegraph Avenue was very densely populated. It was very vibrant back then. There was so much, a lot. It was a spot for the youth, not only the college associated youth, but youth of color from Richmond and Oakland. There was lots of pizza places and record shops, and it was just a great place to meet other young people. And it was a countercultural site, and it was a place of street vendors and just really a lot of street life, which the city of Berkeley was able to choke, through their campaign of giving people jaywalking tickets, towing parked cars, telling shops to close early. They had a lot of methods that they used to make people go, God, it's not worth it to be here. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
And they were trying to really shift who came to. They wanted to more upscale shops. They wanted to be able to harvest more retail taxes for the city by encouraging businesses, not pizza and records, but expensive sweaters and jewelry stores and things that were dealing with more capital, so that there would be more taxes. Because as we know, when the university takes over a property, it no longer pays property taxes, and so the city reaps no benefit from that. So the university is continuing to expand, and the tax base of the city itself continues to shrink. And so that's really what underlies a lot of the gentrification from the city's point of view. From the university's point of view, is that they know no bounds, and we have traditionally, the city of Berkeley is like 103,000 people. When for a lot of the time that I've been here, somewhere hovering around under 105,000. And the university had a population of 33,000 students. Now what's happening is that the university is increasing. Their long-range plan is to increase the student population by they want to get up to 48,000. They want half this town to be students. And so what that does is it shows it continues this gentrification. It displaces people in Berkeley or a lot of that, like at one time in Berkeley, the African American population was upwards of 25%. When I got here in the 80s, it was around there. Now it's less than 8%. I'd be surprised if even 5%. And what's happened is that a lot of the families that historically, people who got here in, World War I or World War II. So there's generations, blah, blah. Those people are being driven out because the university, we've lost the manufacturing sector. We don't have good, jobs for folks unless you work for the university or in retail or the service industry. And so there's no jobs. So a lot of the people African Americans who owned homes, they've either sold because they can't afford to live here anymore and they just want to go to a cheaper place, or, and so their children or grandchildren don't have opportunity, don't have houses. So a lot of the people who are unhoused in Berkeley were born in Berkeley, are from Berkeley. They're not people who come in from New York to live on the streets here. There are sons and daughters. And it's a displacement that's driven by the expansion of the university.
Wow. That is really interesting. I had no idea. I spent most of my adult life in San Francisco, so I'm very familiar with what has grown the houseless population there. But I've always kind of wondered about Berkeley and why it's become the way it has become,
Yeah. No, I mean, once upon a time, in World War, what can I say? During World War II, as you know, that this was a place of migration for African Americans wanting to get the hell out of the South and get away from the violent racism of the South. And so Richmond, shipbuilding, Oakland, Berkeley, it was all blue collar factory work, lots of opportunities for people who were coming from a rural background and coming into this urban situation to good, solid union jobs.
Yeah.
And this whole area, the displacement has been really intense. And it didn't have to be that way. We could have transitioned, we could have retrained, we could have upscaled folks from, what I mean upscale, I mean just provide educational opportunities so that people can go from factory jobs into the digital age, into a computer-based kind of employment. That could have happened. But the lack of support governmentally, and then we had the crack epidemic, where it would put into our communities in that way to devastate an entire generation of folks who, could have really led the digital age.
It's a shame.
Yeah, it's very tragic. And I'm looking at this fentanyl, I'm looking at the drugs on the streets right now, and it's eerily familiar, honestly. I'm like, well, who's making all this? Where are all these drugs coming from?
Yeah.
Who's selling this bullshit?
Yeah.
We've got so many people dying here in Berkeley. I know San Francisco, has been devastated in many ways. Same thing in Berkeley. And God damn, Sue. The city's response, and let's talk about police and how they're used.
Yes.
When we've got encampments and people are overdosing in their tents, what is the response of the city? More bike patrols. It's like saying that you have cancer and somebody putting your arm in a splint. It's totally unrelated. There's nothing that a Berkeley, and I don't even know if they know if they're trained in Narcan, or how they would get it to somebody anyway if they really knew that somebody was overdosing.
Yeah.
The Narcan, the antidote to get people out of overdoses. But I'm also on the mental health commission here in Berkeley, and we were reviewing the budget and the allocations for how these millions of dollars will be spent. And I was shocked. It's like, well, what are you putting into substance abuse? How are we responding to this crisis? They're like, yeah, we're going to put $100,000 in that. What? 100,000? You're not going to. You're not going to touch it. You're not going to touch it.
And exactly what are they going to do with that 100,000? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you can't hire one drug counselor for that.
Yeah, I mean, and even if they did, they probably wouldn't even put any thought into what kind of drug counselors they need or what kind of treatment people need. They just throw money at it.
Yeah, you know? And what we need services on demand. If I am high on whatever and I decide today is my day, I'm ready. This is a bad trip and I'm done. I want to get out of this life. We should have services ready for them at that moment. And instead, what we have is like, well, don't come into our facility high. You know, if you're ready, you got to go out there and roll around in your tent with the rats, you know, a little more and try to get sober. And then we'll give you help. You know, it's a model that's designed to fail.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what rings so familiar to me about the crack epidemic. You know.
Yeah, and this meth thing that's going on right now is so similar, but I think even more dangerous than the crack epidemic because you can stay high on meth a lot longer than you can on crack. So you could be unconscious for 3 days and completely out of your mind.
Yeah, you know? And I just, you know what, there's an unhoused guy named well, I won't name him, but he's a friend of ours, and he lives on Shattuck Avenue. He was beaten mercilessly by somebody who was his friend, who took his guitar and beat the bejesus out of him. You know, had a concussion, you know, wounds all over his body, because this individual was on some combination of mental psychotic break and drugs. And again, what's going to happen to that guy, his friend? Yeah, he'll be incarcerated.
Yeah.
He won't get services.
No.
He'll be incarcerated. And so here's this unhoused guy, totally vulnerable. Not, you know, if you're not addicted to drugs, you are subjected to individuals who are impaired, and it's just a terrible situation. And I cannot believe how few resources are being dedicated to that. And we, you know, in Berkeley, what we've been doing with Copwatch is that, you know, we're looking at, based off of the murder of Kayla Moore in 2013 at the hands of Berkeley police. She was killed. She was a transgender African-American woman living in her own apartment with loving support from her family who lives nearby, checks on her often. She was in her apartment. She got into an altercation with one of her friends. Her friend went and called the police and said, hey, look, you know, Kayla is off her meds and she's having a hard time. We should do a wellness check. Somebody should come by and really check on her and make sure she's okay. Police were familiar with her. They knew who she was. They had done wellness checks on her before. And if we went back and listened to the dispatch tapes, yep, we're going to the Moore residence, you know, yep, this is a person with schizophrenia. Okay, we're going to go. They knew exactly what they were doing. 2 cops show up. Instead of going, oh, you're in your house. Oh, there's your caregiver. Oh, you're cooking dinner. You don't need us. They didn't like, she was talking about this or that. She was speaking in a way that didn't make sense to the officers, mentioning dinosaurs or something like that about it. They were trying to take her into custody. One of the officers was like, well, we've got an outstanding warrant on somebody kind of like this person. It wasn't Kayla. The warrant wasn't for her. But they decided to go hands-on with her. And so in her home, they put their hands on her, and she freaked. She was like, what? I don't have any warrants. That's not me. Blah, blah, blah. So then they start wrestling with her. Then they call for backup. And by the time, you know, that she had 6 cops on top of her, wrestling her, and she was panicked. I also say she was a woman who was upwards of 300 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not somebody that you pin face down on a futon. And, and the cops know about positional asphyxia. They know the risks of her ceasing to breathe. They know all that. So this completely incompetent, if not hateful response to this individual, led Copwatch on this journey. We've been fighting this fight ever since. It's called Care Not Cops, and we believe that police should not be responding to mental health calls. We believe that the resources of this city need to be redirected back to care for people, and that people who are suffering from mental health, from mental illness, should not be, they don't have to be beaten up before they're given services. That's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody who's not armed, there's no allegation of violence. Why would you wrestle with them? But this is the struggle. And I can say that I believe that what happened, people say, well, how did we get here? If we go back to the 1960s and 70s, when 911 was a new invention. And the idea that the way that they were going to resell the police to us yet again, they said, well, it's like a one-stop shopping. You just push this magic button and cops will magically appear. If you see anything suspicious, if you don't like something going down, if your neighbor's radio is too loud, you just call 911 and we'll appear. Well, the reality of 911 is this. In only 3% of calls, 911 calls, actually results in a cop getting to a crime in progress.
Mm.
So 911 is about taking names and, writing reports.
Wow.
So 911 doesn't really do what a lot of people think it does. The other thing is what 911 did in the campaigns to get people to use it is it normalizes the presence of police in every aspect of life.
Mm-hmm.
It makes us think that there's something appropriate about hospital police and postal police and school police and police for every occasion, and that they're welcome in every aspect of our life. And say, whoa, whoa, whoa. The police have nothing to do with mental with mental health. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in their training that is similar to how a clinician is trained. There's no similarity. They shouldn't be there. And so when we're fighting to defund the police, people can talk about whether or not policing itself is a bankrupt institution. I think there's a lot of evidence to indicate that it is. But for right now, we're just saying, look, redirect resources.
Mm-hmm.
Just give us back, the tax money and the resources and the wealth of this city that we've created, and put it to where it will do us some good.
Yeah.
But we've got, our cops here are making $500,000 a year.
What?
Many of them, not just a few, many of them.
Wow.
If you go to a website called Transparent California, you can type in your city and who you want to see. Who's the top wage earner in your city? In our city, there's a lieutenant named Peter Hong, and he made over $500,000 in total compensation. So he's got his $150,000 a year base salary. Then he's got $78,000 in overtime. Then he's got an extra big chunk, some $50,000 in additional compensation. I suspect that means trainings. Kind of like on the weekend, hey guys, let's all go to the active shooter training. It's fun. It's kind of like paintball, and we can get paid a big chunk of change for it. Let's do that on the weekends. They're making bank, huge. And it's not just one or two. It's like, upwards of, I would say, somewhere between 10 and 15% of the entire department is making over $400,000 in total compensation a year.
Wow.
So
wow.
They're hugely well paid. And that's what I mean. They're monopolizing the resources of our city to line their own pockets. So they'll be like, at the same time, the cops will say, well, we don't want to respond to mental health calls. Great. Then give back the money.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what they're saying. They're saying we don't want to have to do that. Yeah, we're busy on bike patrols. We're busy patrolling, and doing, not gathering data, because they're not able to produce any real actionable data. They're not, all the things that they're not doing. They're not solving crimes. So they think that the their value is in their propaganda value. Like, I'm a cop, so nothing bad's going to happen while I'm here. It's not that they're actually finding out who's doing the crimes and solving it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be honest, they have so abused the public trust that very many people don't want to talk to them and don't want to help them to solve crimes. Don't trust them to keep their identities. Don't trust them. So their ability to even solve crimes has been eroded and undermined by their own misconduct.
Right. Well, that's why Poor Magazine put together that training. I don't know if you've ever seen it, the How to Not Call the Cops Ever.
Yeah, that's some great stuff. That's some great stuff.
And it really doesn't take much if
Yeah.
if you have a community that cares more about humanity than I don't know what even to call it, because it's not law and order. People always, when they're pro police, they refer to law and order being, the best way to deal with communities, but
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, clearly, there's a lot of problems out there in spite of how much the police are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So they're not actually helping.
Well, because we're not dealing with root causes.
Right.
It's like the horse is already out of the barn.
Yes.
And they're not helping. But it's a powerful illusion. So people
Yes.
want to believe that you could just call a number and your problems will go away.
Mhm.
I'd love to believe that. I just don't have evidence to support that theory.
Yeah.
And it's tough too, because this battle for me is kind of personal, because I had a friend from out of town who came to stay with me about 2 years ago, and she was clearly psychotic. She was disordered and kind of melting down. And I wanted to reach out. I wanted to get some help here in Berkeley. What do I call? Oh, we'll just call 911. If she's like, throwing things and going. And if I had called 911, she would never have spoken to me again. Mm. She was terrified of the police. She was terrified that instead of getting mental health support, she would get cops. And that's what she would have gotten, unfortunately. And so I didn't call the police. And she suffered quite a lot. And she ended up going back to her hometown of New Mexico, and she's a missing person still.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, it is horrible. I feel really horrible about it, and I feel like there was something I should have done. But what do you do? If she's going to get more terrified by the police and then run away from me, and I know I'm not. I know that some of your listeners have faced similar. It's a conundrum. It's a dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
It's just pick a bad choice. There's no good choice offered there.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make a good choice, and I'm really encouraged to see how many cities, even though it seems, it's obvious to you and me, it's probably obvious to a lot of your listeners that you got to deal with the cause of the problem and not just the symptoms of the problem.
Yeah.
And that's what Care Not Cops is all about. So I know there's been impact in San Francisco. Oakland's got a macros. Everybody's trying to reproduce this program from Eugene, Oregon, or I think it's Eugene. CAHOOTS, the CAHOOTS model of responding. But it's not rocket science. This was all known to us. It's not like there was some huge medical breakthrough or something. It's just mustering the political will and the organization to force these changes through our city governments, and to really, it's about political pressure. That's the only thing that's making this stuff happen, because the police are perfectly content to sit on the vast majority of a city's resources and watch the city just fall apart around them.
Yeah.
And then complain. That it's like, well, you brought this, you did this. You get to have your second home paid for on the backs of unhoused people who are, And then, I'm just going to keep complaining if that's okay.
Go right ahead. Think of this as your weekly therapy session.
Let me just work it out. Well, furthermore, in the budget of Berkeley, there was something called the Mental Health Services Act that was passed in California that says that they're going to put a special tax on anybody making over $1 million, and that those funds would be dedicated to helping address the devastation that happened to mental health budgets throughout the state. So these funds are available. So Berkeley is now, sitting on somewhere between $6 and $8 million of unspent funds that they're saving for a rainy day. And I'm looking out going, I don't mean to alarm you, but it's raining.
Yeah.
It's raining hard.
We could use that money right now.
Absolutely. And so what I'm saying, like, they've got this paltry sum for substance abuse. They directed $200,000 towards the creation of a special care unit, which again is like, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to get, what we want to do is have, dispatch and be able to dispatch, clinicians and peer counselors and so forth to the scene of somebody in crisis to actually deliver services, not restrain them and package them and ship them off to some other facility, but to actually deliver services right there on the spot.
Oh, and I think we talked on the phone about this. I've worked in community mental health since 1987, so I'm right there with you, right? Like, we've watched a lot of crap go down. And what I've learned is that unless the funds that help people are private, it's virtually impossible.
But that is so wrong.
It's so wrong.
That's what they're doing with us.
Work, because what happens when it's government money and we use government systems to help people is that the clinicians and other helpers get bogged down in paperwork. So they can't really give the time and the attention necessary to the people who really need it.
Well, I tell you, it's been quite an education for me too. I totally agree with it. Berkeley has its own mental health division,
right?
Separate from Alameda County, and they have an annual budget upwards of $8 million. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that they're looking for community-based organizations to anchor this special care unit project. And it's like, why, if you've got $8 million, and why isn't that money from the mental health division being used to fund this project? Why are you saying that you have to look over here, look over there, look for a source of funding? You're telling me that you're not going to defund the police and redirect any funds from the police, and you're not going to use the mental health services money. So what the hell is going on? And I totally agree with you that we have something called a mobile crisis team.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, I think there actually was a mobile crisis team. It's never done me any good. The times when I've called it, I get a voicemail. It goes to voicemail. Oh, if you're having a crisis, call 911. It's like, well, I kind of did, and so these guys are out to dinner, and meanwhile, my friend is like, suicidal. So they've never done me any good. But the mobile crisis team right now, it's got two people. Two people. It is budgeted at $771,000 a year. They have, for 9 months that I'm aware of, been telling us, oh, we're trying to hire somebody. You're telling me that in this, you've got a school of psychology. We've got the UC Berkeley. We've got social workers coming out of our ears. You can't find somebody to work on that thing?
Well, to be fair, Andrea, I have been a manager at some of these places I've worked, and it is a problem. And since COVID, it got even worse. To find clinicians you can hire in the Bay Area, because most clinicians, even if they're schooled here, they have to leave afterwards because they have these huge student loans to pay off. They can't afford to pay what the nonprofits are gonna.
But that's what I'm saying is like,
Oh, it's a huge.
pay them, just pay them.
That would be great. Yeah.
Pay their offer to pay. God damn, they come up with signing bonuses for the police. They come up with lots of creative ways to keep their police department staffed. And they need to look at the obstacles to hiring that they've created themselves. And the bureaucratic kind of obstacles that exist. Putting out a call. It's like, well, if the CBOs are able to hire, if the community-based organizations are able to hire people, why can't the city?
Right.
That's what I don't understand.
I feel like the CBOs are struggling too, though, because
to hire.
Yeah, because they just aren't offering enough for people to live here and pay off their student loans.
I hear you, and those are two different problems. Those are two different problems. They have different solutions, But I guess I'm just resentful that we have all these resources accumulated in that department of the mental health division, and that we're just not seeing any results coming from them.
Yeah.
And the lack of evaluation in those divisions is kind of stunning. They're trying to teach us about something called RBA, results-based accountability. Which again, it's like, well, didn't we have that before? Like,
okay.
Is evaluation, is that a new concept?
Yeah.
That you would ask yourself, are we doing any good? How do we know? But they act like this is some scientific breakthrough.
It actually wasn't until I'd say the early 2000s that nonprofits actually started talking about outcomes and all of this scientific measurement stuff. I mean, it's really kind of funny that it didn't come up before then, but now it's like all the rage, and I think it just creates more barriers,
Well, I mean, I think there's a there's a balance, because I also think that the difference in perception on some of these programs is vast. They talk about the homeless outreach team like, oh, these guys are great. They go right to the encampments and they really get down. When I've watched them, they were across the street with a few bottles of water and a couple of flyers. They weren't engaging people. They weren't doing jack shit. I'm sorry. They weren't doing anything. And for the manager who's still back at the office, maybe the hot team sounds great. And it's not to say that some of those people who are doing that outreach are doing a great job. Mm-hmm. They're formerly houseless people themselves, and they're out there with all sincerity doing the work. That's not everybody. And the inability to tell who is effective from who is not effective is vast. I mean, it's an important distinction. And it's also like with our hot team, when we asked them, well, what training did you receive? And they're like, none.
Yeah.
Like, geez. No wonder you're standing across the street with a bottle of water and a flyer. Yeah, you don't know what the hell you're doing. But people who are formerly houseless, they know which referrals are for real and which ones are fake, and what they having lived it, they know what's real. But too often, programs are getting funded to send people out.
Sometimes we just can't stay connected,
That's it. It's all about connection.
Yeah. and honestly, I think that's the number one thing that people need when we're talking about helping people get off the streets is they really need that kind of human connection.
Yeah.
And that takes time, which is why I think a lot of the helping agencies can't do it, because you really can't keep people out there working the number of hours that is necessary, right? Yeah. And even if you do, like because of the outcomes focus, they want a certain number of people seen, right, in order to make their numbers look right. But if you're gonna see that many people, your connections are gonna be kind of superficial. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah, that's a good
very
point.
frustrating.
That's a good point.
Very
Yeah, I mean,
frustrating.
there's
Just why I'm for like private funds funding mental health initiatives, because that way people can actually get the help that they need rather than
yeah.
just a little tiny piece of somebody's time, you know?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the way to go, Sue. Maybe it is, Berkeley, just forget the mental health division and shrink its budget and redirect the funds towards community-based organizations. It's just trying to just accountability, and I think
Right.
that's the challenge, is to try to get these. But that said, we're talking about creating this special care unit in
Mhm.
Berkeley as a collaboration between maybe Lifelong Medical and the Berkeley Free Clinic. That's our hope right now. Nah, she's waiting. She's like, well, she's
I'm
going,
gonna,
what do I know
gonna
about
be quiet
Lifelong? What do I
about
like about them?
that.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna be quiet about that. I don't have a lot of hope for it though, honestly.
Tell me
It's
why. Tell me
sad.
why.
I just feel like the nonprofit industrial complex is not able, because of its limitations, give relevant care. It's
So
really
wait, so tell me, so maybe I'm misunderstanding something. I thought I heard you saying that you didn't believe that the government organizations would be effective.
right.
Now here I'm suggesting these community-based ones, you're like, nope, not
Even
that one
that,
either.
probably
Who's
not.
who's left, Sue? Who's
Right.
left?
Well, there are grassroots nonprofits that I think do really good work, and have fewer restrictions on the work that they do. Like Poor Magazine, like I was talking about, they do amazing work, and they don't have to make sure that they see X number of people every month, you know, so they can build deep connections and show up for people
Mm-hmm.
in really meaningful ways.
What do
Also,
you think would happen to Poor Magazine if somebody gave it $1 million?
if it was unrestricted funds,
There you go.
they'd build more housing. Yeah, which they already have some housing built here in East Oakland. It's awesome.
Is it the tiny
Yeah,
homes?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I did an interview with Tiny already. She's amazing. Uh,
Yes, most definitely.
um, so yeah, so I trust the small grassroots nonprofits. Once they get to medium or large, they tend to lose sight of their mission. And
I'm really interested in why that happens, because it's also
because
true that we
they,
have to scale up
because
because the
they need
need is so great
money,
out there.
Andrea, because they need money. So in order to get the money, they compromise care so that they can keep the money coming in and keep their doors open. It happens everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
It's really sad. So I've really lost faith in the whole nonprofit industrial complex. I tried for a long time.
Yeah.
And I revisited it during I'm blurry. Can you see me?
Oh,
I'm not blurry anymore.
very good.
Are you
Very
still
good.
echoing?
Nope,
Okay.
it's all good.
Um, I even revisited the whole nonprofit industrial complex during COVID because I didn't have enough savings to stay self-employed. So I went back in. I took a job
Mm-hmm.
at I would say medium-sized nonprofit here in the East Bay,
Uh-huh.
and I even told them when I got the job, look, I'm only going to be here about a year because I don't have any savings.
Because I don't believe in what you're doing.
Well, this is how I put it. I take responsibility, right? I say, my personality and nonprofit organizations are not a good fit. So That's how I put it. I, I actually came to that conclusion in a therapy session many years ago that all that's going to happen if I work for a regular nonprofit is that they're going to eat me alive, and I'm going to leave having to go to the emergency room a lot.
Oh.
So it's not good. It's
Let's
not
not do
good.
that. Let's not do that.
So I told them going in, I'm only going to be here about a year, so don't get too attached.
Gotcha.
And I went in and I did my thing. But in revisiting, it kind of rededicated me to working with the smaller nonprofits because it's such a huge machine now. Um,
It is.
every time I got a new person in, and I was working at a crisis residential treatment program, right? So this is for people who are severely mentally ill, most of whom were unhoused and also abusing substances, right? And they would come in crisis. And in 2 weeks, I was supposed to help them get to a better
Stabilize.
place,
Yeah.
right? And I did it, but it was really hard work because whenever somebody new came in, I had 40 pages of paperwork to complete for
Wow.
Medi-Cal, right? So I couldn't just be there with them and help them calm themselves. I had
It'd be so great. I don't know why they don't hire somebody to do the paperwork so that the other person can do the other. It's a different skill set. Some people can whip through that paperwork like this. Myself, it's a barrier. But the folks that can really be with somebody and be effective with somebody and quickly win their trust, it's not the same skill set as somebody who's good with paperwork. Not to say that you can't do both, but I'm saying it's a shame to lose out on those people who really are effective with people.
that point is 100% correct. However, in order to fill out these forms, you have to have a certain kind of degree and credentials, right? In order for Medi-Cal to deem these, correctly done, you have to have a certain degree and credentials. And even if somebody else was doing it, Andrea, this poor person would still have to sit through all of that, and then go see somebody else who's another stranger while they're in crisis. It's a crazy system. It's a really crazy system. And I did my best while I was there, did all the paperwork, did all the people stuff. Very few of my people had to exit to the streets, which I was really proud of, but it was exhausting.
So we have this overlap between the criminal justice system and the mental health system.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think any place, it is really exemplified in this notion of the U.S. Department of Justice did an investigation on Santa Rita Jail. Are you aware of this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I guess what folks can expect from Copwatch in the upcoming months. So for your listeners, did you already do a show on this?
No, go ahead.
Well, the U.S. Department of Justice recently investigated Santa Rita Jail, and they were investigating because they were concerned that there were human rights abuses going on at Santa Rita Jail. And what they were really looking at, especially, was whether or not, or to what degree, people were unnecessarily being incarcerated. So what they were looking at, their findings essentially is that Alameda County relies on psychiatric institutions to serve adults with mental health disabilities who are eligible for public mental health services rather than providing services in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. So the question is, are people being institutionalized who didn't need to be institutionalized? Are people being put in isolation who didn't need to be put in isolation? Are people being served are there people at Santa Rita Jail able to provide services to people with mental health disabilities? And it was found that, they're committing vast human rights violations at Santa Rita Jail related to individuals with mental health needs. And so what we're going to be looking at is how we can extricate Berkeley from that system. Can we put demands on our police department that, no, if you encounter somebody who you believe has a mental health disability, should we send them to Santa Rita? Should we send them to John George? Or is there another way? And we're talking about respite care. We're talking about, it sounds exactly like what you were dealing with as an alternative. And I think we need to really bolster our efforts and really put some. But I think that we could. I mean, if we boycott Santa Rita Jail, it's never made sense to me how somebody can at the same time be recognized as having a mental health disability or suffering from some kind of, psychosis, and still be held criminally liable for what they did while they were having that mental health break.
Yeah.
That's just the unspeakable cruelty of that.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow in their minds, those two things can reside. But it's exciting that the DOJ has released this report, and what is it called? Investigation of Alameda County, John George Psychiatric Hospital, and Santa Rita Jail, and that report is the basis of our actions going forward. Hopefully.
Yeah, it really shocked me when I first moved to Oakland 8 years ago that there weren't any emergency crisis residential programs.
It's not incredible?
In San Francisco, there's about a dozen, which already isn't enough, but
but at least there's something. There's some awareness that that's even on the menu.
Over here, there would be a place where people could go if they were in crisis and they didn't need involuntary hospitalization, which is John George, right? John George gets all the people who are completely out of control and need emergency psychiatric treatment, right? But there was nothing. And then just recently, I think there are 5 now that this nonprofit I was working for actually started in East Bay. Not in Berkeley, unfortunately, but there are some now. But you know how big the East Bay is? That's not even enough. If tiny San Francisco can have a dozen, I think that we could use a lot more than 5, and hopefully they'll keep developing them. But I think that, honestly, the system is broken. The whole nonprofit industrial complex is broken. And any kind of mental health care that requires Medi-Cal billing is not going to be very effective.
Yeah.
Right? So we need more funds to be able to provide really effective treatment, because Medi-Cal is just so limiting.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty incredible that they, Santa Rita Jail has twice the national average of suicides in jail, and that they're taking very seriously mentally ill people and saying, oh, well, you can't be in the general population, so they put them in isolation, which exacerbates their mental illness and makes it even that much harder to come back from what they're already dealing with.
Oh, and I had so many clients who had spent time in Santa Rita, and I was able to access their records, right, from Santa Rita when they would come in. And most of them weren't even diagnosed correctly, And most of them weren't even offered medications. Um, it was just, I don't know what, it's really sad because most people in California actually don't get mental health care at all. Our jails are actually our biggest mental health providers,
Facilities, yeah.
right? But even there, just the level of care was so low.
It's
I just couldn't
appalling. It's
believe. And,
appalling.
and we're not talking about people with diagnoses that are very complicated. We're talking about really easy to spot kind of things, like you could probably spot these things while you're in school. Like, I don't know. Um,
Schizophrenia.
yeah. So it's just really sad to me that
Yeah.
that so many people who are really suffering end up in those systems
To be
that,
tortured. To be
yeah,
tortured.
don't even,
Yeah.
it
So
doesn't
that's another place where we
try
can
to help.
rise up. Where we can rise up and honestly at some point, we have to interrupt that workflow. We have to interrupt that process.
Mhm.
And the whole notion that the county sheriff wanting to expand Santa Rita jail to become a mental health facility is just, what it reminds me of. I don't know, so you grew up in this generation where, like, those of us who grew up in the Cold War era, and they used to talk about the Soviet gulag,
Mhm.
and how they used to take political prisoners and deem them to be mentally ill and banish them to this archipelago of institutions, and people get disappeared in that way.
Mhm.
Boy, it is eerily reminiscent of those worst, what we thought was barbaric has now become policy and standard practice. And it really degrades, I'm going to say, our moral standing, our moral integrity, to allow that to continue.
What is this moral integrity you speak of? I really feel like it's gone, in this country. It's not even a thing here anymore. I remember as a kid that even though
It
wasn't
matters.
perfect, it was a thing. There were certain things that weren't accepted publicly.
And I really feel you on this one. And I recall Martin Luther King in one of his speeches saying that any society that spends more of its resources on military than on programs of social uplift risks spiritual death.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've risked it. I think we approached it. But I wanted to share a little thing that was hopeful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a little thing, actually. I think it's rising up from very deep down in the soil, actually. And that is the Berkeley shell mound struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe this is related to cop watching and care and all these things, because what Corrina Gould and others, indigenous folks in this area, are making space for prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And making space in that shell mound area for all kinds, for everybody, and holding that space so beautifully. And I think it's possible that they may help us all, lead us back to a moral north and a moral south and moral orientation.
Yeah.
That there is something good, that we can grow it, that we can cultivate it, that we can fight for it, that we can defend it. And
Yes.
I find that whole movement very inspiring and definitely related.
Yes.
Definitely related to everything. And when I saw you at that protest in Oakland, and the dancers were there, and the feeling, I just really appreciate that, though, that struggle that you're part of has lifted that up and integrated, baked that into the politics, baked it into the movement itself. And I think, you know, in the same way that the civil rights movement was really baked into the Black churches and that morality, I feel that there's an incredible potential to help us to recover our humanity in some sense. And so I thank you for your efforts in that struggle and your association with that struggle.
You know, Segurite Land Trust, I mean, is a miracle. And I feel like political action without spiritual grounding rarely works, because people just get stuck in anger and frustration, you know? And people just, you know, like this whole, I don't know, last 5 years in this country, just people are separated into their warring tribes and angry. And it doesn't really work. So I think that whatever kind of spiritual awakening people are going to have, it's going to be necessary in order to move us out of this time we're in.
I completely agree.
You know, and it's funny because when people talk about climate, the climate crisis, they often say, oh, you know, don't you love the earth? Don't you want the earth to survive? And, you know, I do. I love Mother Earth, and I want the earth to survive, but I don't think it's the earth that isn't going to survive.
Right.
I think it's humanity.
Yeah.
I think the earth will be here long after we're gone.
That's right. That's right.
So we need to do something to ensure our own survival and our children's survival and our grandchildren's survival. You know, it's really important. And I think one of the things that that made Homefulness so special, you know, Homefulness is the place that we have out in East Oakland. It's one of the people-led solutions to homelessness, right? Is that when they bought that land, they connected with Karina Gold and other
good
elders and asked permission to liberate that land, you know, because we're all living on this stolen land and pretending we're not, right? And people might not remember the history because in the society we're asked to pretend as if it doesn't exist. But before colonization in this country, the earth wasn't something you could buy or sell. Right? And everybody had the right to live somewhere. You know,
it wasn't even a question. It's a fact. It's just,
Yeah, and we can decide that that's how we want to live again. You know, just because we've created this big, ugly system that doesn't work, doesn't mean that we have to keep doing this thing that doesn't work for most people. You know, as far as I can tell, the only people who are doing really well are billionaires. You know?
And can you imagine Jeff Bezos? Can you imagine what kind of perversion and distortion of your own humanity you have to go through to somehow justify going into space while everywhere around you people are sick and dying? Like, what kind of animal would do that?
Well, I think that it's fine if he and his friends want to go there, because then maybe we can change our system here and we can all live together. And
I mean, if they all leave and go to Mars and then more for the rest of us here, we get to clean up that mess.
Yeah, I think everybody with that kind of mindset should go to space, like now, right?
Well, you know, it's funny because like the story, there's a story in the Old Testament, the Tower of Babel. You know, this hubris that humanity has from time to time, where they, in this case, it was building a a tower with the idea that you would get up to God or something like that, and that the tower fell and everybody, was divided by language. But it does kind of remind me of that kind of incredible hubris that human beings think that they're going to go colonize some other planet and leave their own planet in such devastation.
Yes.
And it will fall, and this system will fall, and the Jeff Bezos of this world. We have to remember that it's an illusion. Their wealth is an illusion that we allow to exist in our minds.
Right.
At any day that humanity decides enough is enough, we don't believe in this anymore, he could be just like the rest of us.
Yep.
But can you imagine thanking his employees for sending him to space? As if they had a choice. As if, put part of my paycheck in the Jeff Bezos.
Well, and what's sad too is that there's probably some employees out there who felt proud when he said that. I feel like the process of decolonizing one's mind takes time, right?
Yeah, it does.
And a lot of people don't have time. They're just so busy trying to survive that they don't have time to reflect and see how this whole machine is working or not working for them.
Right.
So there you go. We got deep.
True that.
And I bet we could go on, but
yeah.
I'm gonna close our interview.
I understand.
At least the public part of it.
There you go.
One of my favorite questions, which is you kind of partially answered, but I wanna throw it back again. What gives you hope?
Yeah, I think it's, honestly, I have to say the most inspiring thing, honestly, is to listen to Karina Gould and others helping us to move in a integrity means your whole self, to not have to be different in one part of your life than in another part of your life. So that I don't put one face to the cops, one face to my family, one face to my partner, that it's the same. And when I hear her speak, it's like refreshing water for my spirit. That it's integrity. And it's funny because when I hear her speak, it's like she's not saying anything that I feel like I know it. In some part of me knows what she's saying, but the part of me that's of this earth, is busy with other things, and I really am hopeful that I just want to bring that spirit into all the spaces of my life and all the organizing spaces, and I feel that that's happening. Mm-hmm. Even Copwatch, we've begun to, we're a 30-year-old organization. We're doing land acknowledgements now at the beginning, and I thank everyone who has been working so hard to lift up that consciousness. And I think that's a really important door that we can pass through, that no matter what happens, if we're peaceful in our hearts, if we're peaceful with the people that we're working with, and we know why we're doing it, then no matter what happens, we have reason to celebrate.
Yes, absolutely. That's beautiful. I want to thank you so much for coming here.
Oh, thank you.
Berkeley Copwatch.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
If you have a few extra pennies, please come here and donate, because every penny makes a difference. And I really admire the work you guys are doing. And thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Sue. And let your folks know that if they one thing that we're really good at, I think, is know your rights trainings. We've been doing them for 30 years, so we're starting to get the hang of it.
Cool.
And if anybody out there is thinking about wanting to become a cop watcher in their community or organizing a group, please contact. We have lots of resources that might be helpful. They're all accessible. We're happy to share. We're happy to do a know your rights training for folks to help you get started. We're not trying to tell anybody how to do it in their neighborhood, but we do want to share what we, what we've created if it's useful to people. So give us a call.
Yeah, and I'll put the link for your website in the video
Great.
description so people know how to get hold of you guys.